Great. So we are on YouTube and Renata is co-host. So we will call the meeting to order, and is Nancy on to do a roll call?
And I'm just pulling up the list. Hold on.
Looks like we have a great turnout.
Okay, roll call. Carol Singer.
Here.
Namrata.
Here.
Don Jenkins. Don Jenkins. Richard Craig.
Present.
Matthew Pease.
Here.
Beth Needle.
Oh, I'm here.
Jim Cervantes.
Present.
Mike Kim.
Here.
Susie Kelly.
Here.
Christine Rasmussen.
Here.
Christine Lee. Christine Lee.
If Christine is calling in on the 925 phone number, please hit *9 and raise your hand, and we can promote you to speak.
Last call, Christine Lee. Okay.
We did have a raised hand. Hold on one
Okay.
second. I think they might be on a different name.
I'm here.
Okay.
Oh, it's under Phil Lee. I'm sorry. I'm using my husband's iPad.
Okay. Anna Radinich.
Present. Present.
Teresa Geringer.
Here.
And that's all the primary members.
Great. So we will go ahead and adopt the agenda. And as we did last time, if you have an objection to adopting the agenda, please raise your hand or speak up. Otherwise, we will adopt. And then, excuse me, we'll move to public comment. So if anyone from the public would like to make a comment on an item that's not on the agenda, please raise your hand and we can let you in for to make your comment. Also, if you're calling in, use *9 and we can allow you to speak. I'm not seeing any public comment. So we'll go ahead and move on to discussion items. So first thing is just to kind of go over what we're going to go over at this meeting, and then we'll jump right into a presentation from the City Attorney on the Brown Act.
Sarah, I think I can share my screen if you'd like me to do so, but I know you're going to go over the agenda first.
Yep, either way. Yeah, I can. I did get the PowerPoint, so. Oops. Okay. Okay, so we are here at this meeting, and our objectives today are to become familiar with the Brown Act, to take the oath of office. We want to review the meeting protocols in general, including the role of the chair and vice chair. We want to discuss and establish our group agreements, sort of our ground rules for how we will be operating. We want to talk briefly about public engagement and the stakeholder list, and then also staff's recommendation for how the meetings will flow. And then also sort of the order of operations for each of the elements, how we will move through the general plan in its entirety. So I'll go ahead and do a new share, and I will allow Mala to take over for.
Do you want me to go ahead and share?
Actually, maybe you should, just because you'll be able to.
Yeah. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Looks good.
Okay, great. I was just realizing as Sarah spoke, I kind of have my traditional Brown Act presentation that I know several of you have heard, but we are able to conduct these meetings during the pandemic on Zoom because the governor has allowed us to do that and issued an executive order. And something that you've been doing on these meetings, or will be doing on these meetings, that you won't do once we get back to meeting in person, is because we're handling these meetings electronically, you're required to vote by roll call. And when you get back to meeting in person, you'll just, someone will make a motion, someone will second it, and you can vote in that manner, which will be a little bit faster considering how large your group is. I just wanted to point that out for some of the differences you'll see in the near future. Hopefully the near future. I'm being optimistic about how soon we can get back to meeting in person. So we'll get started. Let's see. The Brown Act is found in the Government Code, and it requires that our meetings are open to the public and have a meeting location, a time, and agenda descriptions of what you're going to talk about. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a bit, but it applies to local agencies. So it applies to cities and counties and school districts and water districts and any other public agency that you can imagine. It applies to legislative bodies such as the City Council and the various commissions. And then interestingly, this is very pertinent right now, it applies to those members of the City Council who have just recently been elected but have not assumed office. So as you probably are aware, we have 2 new council members who will be sworn in about a month's time, but the Brown Act applies to them now as if they were already on the City Council. So that's one nuance that usually I'm talking about that doesn't apply in real time. Feel free, if you want to stop me and ask questions, feel free to do it during the presentation, or I can also wait and take questions as we go along. I have no preference. As I mentioned, it applies to legislative bodies, so that in this case, the governing body is the City Council, but it also applies to all the subsidiary bodies, such as all the commissions and committees, including GPAC. It would also apply to a private board that the city created or that the city gave funds to and designated a member from the legislative body. When we talk about meetings that need to be agendized, it can be a gathering of the majority of the group. So for GPAC, your group is 11 members, and so your quorum is 6. So it could be a gathering of 6 of you. In the olden days, it would be a gathering in person, but it could also be electronically done via, an email group setting or a Facebook settings in any sort of technological gathering. It can also happen in a serial situation where it's one-on-one type events, and we'll describe that. That's where I think some of the more inadvertent Brown Act violations occur. I think people have a good sense of not to be with the majority of the group. Again, here deliberating, discussing issues of importance to the GPAC's, I guess, goals and what is the right word? What your mission, really your mission statement is. If you're talking about things that are unrelated to GPAC, that's not going to be considered a meeting. So that's also something to take into consideration. So the first example in a serial meeting can occur in what we call the chain example. That's when Commissioner A speaks to Commissioner B about a matter, again, of significance to GPAC's business. B speaks to C speaks to D, on and on until we have a quorum of 6 having discussed or deliberated about GPAC business. The other example that can occur as well is called the hub and spoke example, and that's where it can be a commissioner in the X position who speaks individually to a majority of commissioners. Commissioner X speaks to A, B, C, D, E until you have a quorum of discussions about GPAC business. Or X could also be a staff member. Staff is allowed to have briefing sessions with each of you, but they cannot then repeat any comments or feedback you may have given to staff and such, that when they talk to other commissioners, they indicate, well, I just spoke to Commissioner A and Commissioner A thinks this. So if that were to occur, you could see that it would also create a serial meeting that would be in violation of the Brown Act. There's some new laws under the Brown Act that have just occurred that deal with social media. The Brown Act has been in effect for quite some time, and just more recently kind of has dealt with the fact that you have board members, council members posting on their social media accounts, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And it's made it clear that you can post about GPAC business on social media. You can answer questions, provide information to the public, or solicit information from the public regarding GPAC business. But you can't discuss amongst yourself, and when I say yourself, the GPAC Commission, GPAC business on social media. There's also certain requirements in order for you to do this on social media. You have to have it be on a platform that's open and accessible to the public. So for instance, if you're using Facebook, it can't be in a private Facebook group where you're not allowing anyone on Facebook to see the post. And you can't block or deny access to the post. In addition, if let's say one of the committee members here makes a post and another committee member can't respond to it, even if it's like an emoji response or a like response, they've made that very clear. Other commissioners shouldn't be responding to commissioners' posts. So again, I think your posts are more outward faced towards members of the public and responding to members of the public. But as commissioners, you shouldn't be responding to other commissioners' posts on GPAC business. The Brown Act doesn't apply to every contact or every, what I'll say, meeting where all of you would be in attendance. If you have contacts with the public, that would not be subject to the Brown Act. If you are talking to a member of the public and that member of the public has spoken to other commissioners, which they're allowed to do, you may want to indicate that you don't want to hear any other commissioner's thoughts on GPAC business to avoid an unintentional violation. You can attend conferences that are open to the public. You can attend other meetings of other organizations that are open to the public. None of those have to be agendized under the Brown Act. You can attend a meeting of another public agency, again, that's open to the public. You can attend social gatherings in compliance with COVID that don't relate to GPAC business. Obviously, if in any of these examples I'm giving, a quorum of you are discussing GPAC business at the event, then you're going to get into a Brown Act violation. But if you're just purely there listening to an MTC meeting, for instance, that's open and noticed to the public, you'd be allowed to do that as a quorum of you without violating the Brown Act. And then something that is pretty routinely used through the city is what we call ad hoc committees. Ad hoc committees are when less than a quorum of this committee, so it would be 5 members or less, have a meeting. And usually what would happen is the committee would create an ad hoc committee of less than a quorum and on a subject matter that is of not continuing jurisdiction. So what we call it is something of kind of a shorter duration of time. So if you have something that you want a smaller group to work on and bring back to the full committee, that could be done and it wouldn't be subject to the Brown Act. It has to be less than a quorum, and you can't have other members who aren't part of the committee part of that group. So in this example, it would have to be 5 members of the committee or less. So you cannot discuss anything that isn't on an agenda. And so there are exceptions. For instance, if something came to the attention of the city, what we call late breaking, it can be added with a 2/3 vote, but you do need to make this what we call urgency finding, that you need to take action before your next meeting. This is very rarely done. If there's an emergency, you can add items by a majority vote. And then if you have a meeting and, for instance, you couldn't get to all of the items and you wanted to continue those items to another meeting within 5 calendar days, you wouldn't need to re-agendize it.
I do see a hand raised. Shall we take a question now?
Please.
Carol, go ahead.
Well, it applied a few slides ago. I wondered if that, when you were talking about talking to other members, does that apply to talking to alternates?
That's a good question, Carol. I think I've been thinking about that. In this committee, alternates are operating a little different than I'm used to seeing, because alternates are not filling in if a member is absent or misses a meeting. They're only going to step in, as I understand it, if a committee member vacates his or her seat or resigns, right? So I don't think alternates are really serving as committee members until such time as they fill in as a primary member. So given that, I think they probably are members of the public, for instance, until they sit in and become, they're not going to be counted as to the quorum. So until they become a primary member, I think they can serve as members of the public for purposes of the Brown Act.
Well, is this the time to raise? I was under the impression, I think some of the alternates are also, that they would attend when the primary could not, for family reason or something. I did not know that of course, that raises the question later on, if you can't attend, who does attend from your group?
And I think we'll talk about that just a little bit later, but in the one of the documents, the charter, I think it was, it outlines that it would be a replacement. The alternate is a replacement member of the committee. So it's not, so in order to provide that consistency throughout the whole duration of the general plan. So we do want them to kind of keep abreast and keep apprised of what's going on, but they would not be voting members unless and until that seat is vacated. And we can talk about, what that ends up looking like, how many meetings are missed before your seat is vacated. But that's the intention. Or that's the staff recommendation at this point.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if something changes with how alternates are viewed from that staff recommendation, then we may revisit, when and if the Brown Act applies. But if it stays the way it's proposed, then I don't see them counted towards the quorum and wouldn't be subject to the Brown Act. But then also to note, when I gave that example of ad hoc committee members, you wouldn't want to put an alternate on an ad hoc committee unless you wanted to make it subject to the Brown Act, because they aren't part of the full committee. Were there any other questions, or should I keep going?
Like no questions currently. Go ahead.
Okay. So then you can always give a brief response or statement to any question from the public. If there's public comment on an item that's not on the agenda, you can always briefly respond to it or ask staff for clarification on that item or to give a brief response. You can also always give brief announcements or reports on your activities, or staff can also give brief announcement or reports on their activities if you've attended maybe a relevant public meeting that you think would be important for the committee to know about. You can also provide reference or information to staff. And then likewise, if there's something you want to see at a future meeting, you can ask staff to report back on a specific matter. And none of these have to be on the agenda to do. There are exceptions to closed session. I'm just mentioning these briefly. These are things that typically the city council handles, and I don't foresee a closed session for GPAC, but all of these meeting agendas and descriptions are held in an open forum setting, but in closed session, there are certain items that are discussed in private, such as litigation, if the city is interested in acquiring property, and then personnel matters. There's a larger list, but these are kind of the standard ones that the city uses if it needs to go into closed session to discuss more confidential information. And that is it for me.
Okay, do we have any questions for Mala?
Mala, this is Matt Pease. Could you explain a little bit more, if we run into people of GPAC in a social setting, is there anything that we should think about in those settings that might get us into trouble?
I think if you're running into them at a social setting and you talk about GPAC business, just make sure you're not talking to a quorum of commissioners. And then keep in mind that, let's say you've talked to 2 other commissioners. So now it's been 3 commissioners discussing a GPAC item, and then you are at a social event and you run into 3 different commissioners, and you're in your head, you might be thinking, oh, I can talk to them, it's less than a quorum, but you've already just talked to 2 other commissioners about the same issue. So you just may want to be careful trying to remember all of your conversations. If it's on different subject matters, then it wouldn't be an issue. But if it's the same subject matter, just be careful about hitting a quorum talking about that issue.
Thank you.
A question in regards to what Carol was talking about on the alternates. Am I correct then that the alternate really is not serving, and only after we as the primary person resigns or somehow is removed, do they become a consideration? And how do you transfer the information that you have accumulated to the alternate, or do they start all over again?
Right, and so I think that is the purpose of the alternate, is to make sure that we have that continuity throughout the process, because it is such a long time frame. We want there to be an easy transition if a transition is necessary. So they're definitely invited to all the meetings. They will be emailed and all the information, and they can, attend as a member of the public to keep abreast, but would not be voting members.
Okay, so they can attend as members of the public, because they just are not voting. Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Any other questions for Mala? Thank you very much, Mala.
Thank you all.
And if you do have any questions in the future, feel free to just let me know and I can reach out to Mala and ask for you. Okay, and now we'll have an interesting event. We're going to have Miss Joanne Robbins issue the oath of office. And so you all will, all of the primary GPAC members will unmute yourselves and repeat after her.
Okay, so this is hello, all of you. It looks like you have an 11-member body, and it appears that you have everyone in attendance, if I did a quick tally on my list here. So I'm going to do this simply. I'm going to say, do you, and then I'm going to list 11 names. Then I'm going to read you the oath. And at the end, you will say, I do. Kind of like a marriage, but not quite. Then I'm going to mail this to you, and you're going to sign it and return it to me. So this is kind of a Zoom swearing in oath of office, and it's kind of new to all of us, so we'll give this a go. So, do you, Carol Singer, Namrantha Kay, Don Jenkins, Richard Craig, Matthew Pease, Beth Needle, Jim Cervantes, Mike Kim, Susie Kelly, Christine Rasmussen, Christine Lee, do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which you're about to enter.
I do.
I do. I do.
Okay. Got you all? I'm going to mail this to you. You'll sign it and return it to me. I'll give you an envelope. It should be very simple. And I'm going to email each of you because the training that you just took with Mala, the little overview of the Brown Act, I think it can be supplemented as well by training. It's just a little online training called AB 1234, and the state has it available on their website, and it gives you some practical examples of how these open meeting laws and transparency issues are addressed in the meeting setting that you will be in. It's voluntary, but I suggest you give it a try. You can take it all at one time, and it should take you between an hour to 2 hours to do it, or you can take it in small increments, but that would be my suggestion. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. And I will just also comment that I had in the charter outlined that this Form 700 was required. However, I was corrected this afternoon, so it is not a requirement of this group. Is that correct, Joanne?
Yes, that's correct. Our expert at BBK Law has given us her opinion that you are an advisory body to the city council, so they are not going to require the Form 700. So that is good for you.
That's good.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Any questions for Joanne?
So I'm the youth commission member, and as you know, I'm not 18 yet. I'm not an adult. And so is like everything I sign and all of that, is that considered like legal and all binding and all of that? Is that okay?
I would take my cue from Mala, but I think you're fine. We're not obligating you to pay. Maybe with your time, but I think you'll be fine by signing this. I think you probably, did you sign it as a youth commissioners? Our youth commissioners generally take an oath.
I think we do, but
Yeah, and it's the same oath.
Okay.
We give it to all of our volunteers. Okay, does that make you feel better? Okay.
Great.
thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Okay, let's move on. So I am going to share my screen here. So we want to jump into the main meat of the discussion and talk about how to run a meeting. So we wanted to talk about the role of the chair and vice chair more specifically because it is somewhat of a little bit more of a commitment as we move through the process. And so as you're thinking about whether or not you might want to take on that role or nominate someone else to take on that role, just thinking about what it entails. So this role provides leadership and facilitates all of the meetings. So instead of me doing it, it would certainly be the chair, and the vice chair would do it in the absence of the chair. So making sure that there's order and everyone is respectful at the meetings, that there is room for discussion of the group as well as public comment, and that things are sort of moved forward and progress is made. Sometimes that means coalescing, some of the disparate comments and conversation that goes on, to try and come up with a consensus or move forward. You also would coordinate with staff if there's additional information or resources that are needed for the meeting or for this body to do its work. And then also attending Planning Commission and City Council meetings on occasion, in order to present and be the face of GPAC. So in terms of meeting logistics, the term of service for all of you is the duration of the committee. So once the general plan is adopted, the committee will be disbanded. But we do want to talk about the term of service for the chair and vice chair. So typically on other committees and commissions, it's a year term and it rotates. You could also decide as a group that you want to have the chair for the duration of the GPAC, as long as it's established. So that'll be a question just at the end. In terms of regular meetings and special meetings, this is a special meeting, so it is not the normal one that we came up with, which is the third Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m. So those regular meetings will be noticed with 72 hours, providing the information to the public, posted to the website, and physically at the city offices as well. Special meetings only require 24-hour notice, but of course we try as much as possible to get it out as soon as possible, but just understanding the distinction between those two. We talked a little bit about quorum. So it is an 11 voting member body, so 6 members are a quorum, and then typically the simple majority of that quorum, or whoever's present at the meeting, would be able to pass a motion. In terms of making a motion, I did place kind of just the how-tos in that document. So typically this is after the discussion, public comment and discussion, then there's sort of the action to move forward. And so someone will say, I make a motion to, or I move to, and whatever the action is, and then call for discussion, and then second of the motion, call for discussion, and then a roll call vote. And so just to go back to voting, the primary members are the voting members. We do have our alternates, and they are non-voting members. So essentially members of the public, but with a little bit more expectation that they kind of stay on top of what's going on, so they can step in if needed. And then just in terms of running a meeting, a roll call vote is much easier on this sort of platform. And as Mala mentioned, it's actually a requirement. I did want to just point out our city's website. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with it, but these are the locations where you would be able to find meeting information. So in this lower right-hand corner of the city's website, there's a calendar. So it shows that this evening's meeting, sort of the next couple meetings on this leaderboard. And then if you wanted to go to the full calendar, which would show this calendar and all of the events and meetings for the entire month, you can click on that. You can also click on the general plan info link here, and that will take you to the Plan Lafayette website. And then also this public meetings button here will also get you to previous public meetings, and more specifically, if you're looking for an action agenda or something. And then this is also in your packet, but just kind of, and these are suggestions and recommendations from staff, but certainly this will be a discussion of the group as to whether or not you like these agreements or want to adjust or modify them. But essentially sort of regularly attending and participating in all of our meetings, asking questions if you don't understand, making sure everyone is able to contribute. Allowing others to talk if you know you talk a lot, and maybe even asking questions if you're not hearing from someone. Keeping the discussion informal, working collaboratively and being solutions oriented so that we can make progress, making sure that everyone is heard, so one person speaking at a time, and then respecting each other's opinions, even if you don't agree with them, being conscious of time, and then our phones should be off so that we are focused. Regular breaks that the chair can certainly call for or anyone can suggest. And then participating in the public engagement activities that are sort of outside this more formal public meeting. So I'm going to stop here for a minute, but I do want to sort of pose these questions to the GPAC. So should the term for the chair and vice chair be rotating or permanent? And if it is rotating, then for what's the duration? I would suggest a year, just because that's sort of consistent with other committees and commissions. Within the documents we provided, there was a note about essentially if you're absent for 3 consecutive meetings without kind of talking to anyone, that may be a reason to have your alternate step in. But maybe want to talk about whether or not 3 meeting absences is the right amount for this group, if everyone's can agree to that. Whether or not the rules and expectations are clear, and then if the group agreements are acceptable, or if you want to add anything or revise anything. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and we'll have a little group discussion about those things. And so we'll just start off with the first question. Go ahead, Don.
Since I expect this to last perhaps 5 years, 3 meetings, is that for the 5 years or is that 3 meetings in a row?
3 consecutive meetings.
Okay.
So I have a question, it's Matt, on just make sure I understand this on the alternate. The alternates aren't there in case we can't make a single meeting. If we can't make a single meeting, we just miss the meeting. That's what happens. They're only going to be used if we're leaving the commission for whatever reason, really. Is that kind of how I think about it? Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
One other comment or suggestion on the chair or the vice chair. Have you ever done it where maybe they do it a year at a time, especially starting off, and at the end of the year, they have an option to rotate to somebody else, if either they don't like it or it's just not working for whatever reason. But if they like it and they're good at it, they could continue. I don't know, has that ever been done?
Not typically, but
Okay.
Not to say it couldn't be done.
But again, this is a group that doesn't know one another. A few of us know one another socially, so it's very difficult to decide who you want to have direct traffic. I would think what Matt's suggesting is a good idea, to start and then rotate it after a year or even 6 months, take a look. But
That brings up, I hope we're going to get a roster, because otherwise, it's hard to even remember people's names. You see them on the screen, but if you met them somewhere, let's see, who was that now? And I agree with Don. I think it's, we should maybe try it out. In the old GPAC, we had one chair for the 10 years. However, we all basically knew each other. So this is a little different experiment.
Anna?
I like on planning commission, we rotate about every year. And I think it's beneficial. A chair brings a different perspective because we all come from different backgrounds. Some of us are on other groups in the city. I like the idea of rotating every year. If it happens to be working out, person A is chair and everyone agrees that person should remain chair, then that's a different story, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. But I think we're all on the committee because we all bring a great perspective that the overall committee can benefit from.
I think Anna brings a good point up, especially if you have multiple people that want to be the chair. I don't know if you've had any volunteers at this point. If you don't have any volunteers, it might be hard to have multiple chairs.
That's true too. Jim?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of aligning with Ann on this. The order of operations has got a 3-year calendar. This could stretch longer, as Don mentioned. So I kind of think the idea of having sort of rotating chairs makes sense. It's a lot to ask of one person to be chair for the term of this, where it could be at least 3 to maybe 5 years. You know, that's a major commitment. It's hard to gauge at this point how big that really is. But I think if you set up for a year and then with the idea that you could rotate it, that allows for different people to get involved in a deeper way through the course of this venture.
Yep.
Okay, so is there additional discussion? And if not, we can practice our first motion. Beth, did you have something?
No, I was just going to forward a motion that the chair is in place for 1 year, and after 1 year we will rotate.
Great.
I'll second.
That was
You could ask a question. I'm assuming this is chair and vice chair. Is that
yes.
right?
Yes. So in theory, then if you did 1 year, then the vice chair would step into the chair role, but they could like kind of cycle through if they.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Who was the second?
I was.
Richard. Thank you. Oh, sorry. You go by Dick, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, great. So that was chair and vice chair, great. And then about the 3 meetings missing 3 meetings, 3 consecutive meetings, as to whether or not that would be sufficient number in order to sort of, it was a little bit more gentle in the outline to kind of put you on sort of a, maybe just get together and talk about what's going on. Like we get together with the primary, the alternate and staff and kind of see where we're at, just to make sure that you are still interested in participating and can still fulfill your duties.
And I would assume with health issues, I mean, 3 months is a long time for health things, but it at least at some of our ages, a long illness is not unthought of, and but I think it sounds that this is flexible enough that you could, there are extenuating circumstances, and that's where the alternate would step in and you would decide at that point with you or with the chair as to whether you're going to continue.
Right. So the question is just whether or not 3 is the right number.
Is it possible if you can't make a meeting, or you think you can't make a meeting, let's say 2 in a row, that you can Zoom in from wherever you are? Let's just say you're out of the country for a few months.
You mean when we're allowed to meet in person?
Yes. Uh-huh.
I think that's a great idea. And I think that we will try and find a way to make that work regardless, just because it is a better way to reach a greater number of people.
Mm-hmm.
Jim?
Sarah, don't we have a motion on the floor that we should vote on?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Turns out I'm not a very good chair. Yes, we do. We have a motion from Beth and a second from Dick about the 1 year timeframe for chair and vice chair. So Nancy, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Okay, Carol Singer,
Here, yes, I mean,
Namrata,
Yes.
John Jenkins,
Yes.
Richard Craig,
Yes.
Matt Pease,
Yes.
Beth Needle,
Yes.
Jim Cervantes,
Yes.
Mike Kim,
Yes.
Susie Kelly,
Yes.
Christine Rasmussen,
Yes.
Christine Lee.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Great, motion passes.
Oh, first one.
Yay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, and so 3 meeting absences. Anna, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just have a question. So if we're a liaison from Planning Commission or City Council, we're obviously not voting. So I assume that means too that we don't make motions or seconds, just right?
Correct. You would definitely be part of the discussion, questions and discussion, but not making motions, seconding, or voting.
Okay, thanks.
Sarah, can I make a motion to adopt the rule of if you miss 3 meetings, you have to consider having the alternate take over for you.
Okay.
Second, I'll second.
Point here, that's very vague. You have to consider, I think it's either should be or you need to be a little bit more precise, Matt, in the language. That's too vague.
Don, I guess the only thing I was suggesting to be a little soft on, I agree with you, is to be a little soft on it is, what if it's a health issue and the person seems to be recovering? I was just trying to give some flexibility for those unforeseen circumstances. I would think most people, if you miss 3 in a row, you probably shouldn't be on the commission or the advisory committee. But I was just trying to give us some flexibility if somebody had extenuating circumstances.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
I'll second your motion.
There's a question. So is this something that we could work out through like with the discretion of the chair, or I mean, that might be one way where someone's got an issue, and I mean, you'd think they would talk with the chair of the GPAC about that. I don't know, because discretion might be helpful, but I think the chair might have a role in that, perhaps.
Yeah, so I think just the 3 meetings is sort of a threshold for us to kind of say, hey, wait a minute, like there's a lot you're missing. So let's have a discussion about what's going on.
Okay.
Well, the reality is we're only meeting once every 30 days. So it's not like this is a weekly meeting. So that's a quarter of the year if you've missed 3 meetings.
I just have a quick question. Does 3 meetings include like just the normally scheduled meetings, or does it also include like special meetings like this?
Very good question. I would say 3 regular meetings, but that's up for discussion for the group.
I would agree.
Right.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Is there further discussion?
Yes, I think part of this problem is the role of the alternates. Because on the GPAC before, the alternates were not designated. So if a commissioner couldn't come to the meeting, the commissioner or whoever just asked someone in their group to attend the meeting and report back. And that kept the body that they represent in the picture of what is going on. Now you have that missing because if the primary misses a meeting, there's nobody there for them. So if they miss 2 meetings, how many meetings can they miss before the group they represent doesn't know what's going on anymore? If the alternates could step in, then the group and report back to the group, the primaries representing, then they know what's going on. So here you have the way it's set up this time, there's this gap Okay, who reports back to the group? So
So-
that's why I think you get into the discussion, how many meetings can they miss? So how many meetings, for instance, in my case, it would be the Park and Rec Commission. How many meetings do they not hear about what's going on? But if I have to miss a meeting, if Lauren could step in and report back to the group, then the group hears. And to me, that's the role of the primary, is also to keep their group informed of what's going on. So I don't know what the answer to that is, except that you let the primary come to that meeting and then report back to the group, you would have it solved. And then you could see the health issue. I mean, somebody could be out 2 meetings with a broken hip or something. But you know, how many meetings do you go? But if the primary could step in for that meeting, that would sort of solve it a little bit, because certainly in 3 years or 4 years, I think all of us are going to miss a certain number of meetings.
Hey, Carol, this is Matt. If I understand you correctly, if I had to miss a meeting, couldn't I ask my alternate to attend, to at least listen, engage in the discussion? And the only thing she couldn't do is vote, but at least she would be aware of what's going on and could report back to, in my case, the chamber.
Yes.
Does that, so it doesn't sound like there's a restriction of the alternates attending our meetings. The only restriction is they can't vote.
Well,
Is that right, Sarah?
You're correct, but they're not designated as your replacement. So if you miss meetings, then you'll be out.
Yeah, I think a couple of things that might help is, one is that there would be an action agenda for every meeting. So there would be a documentation of what actually did happen. And then also all of the alternates are invited to view the meeting and could definitely report back as to what happened. Does that help, or?
I think we're fortunate right now that anybody can tune in whenever they want to watch a meeting, that if they're an alternate or if they're just a member of the nonprofit community in our instance. Or these are also being recorded, and are these going to be uploaded to the city website as well?
They will be available on YouTube, yes.
Okay, so there's a lot of opportunity for the entire community to listen and watch.
Good point.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so being mindful of time but not wanting to squash discussion, we have a motion on the floor and a second if you'd like to further discuss, or we can call for a vote.
Call for the question.
Okay. And it was Matt had made the motion, and was it Carol that Don seconded?
Don seconded.
And the motion was for if a person missed 3 regular meetings.
3 regular consecutive meetings,
Right.
we'd have a discussion about the future. Okay, Nancy, do you want to do a roll call?
Carol,
Aye.
Namrata,
Yeah, yes.
John,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Beth,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Susie,
Yes.
Christine,
Yes.
and Christine Lee.
Yes.
Motion passes. And then I just wanted to generally, are there any questions about sort of the roles, expectations, group agreements, any of those things that you want to make adjustments to? I'll just go ahead. Jim?
Yeah, I thought the group agreements that you laid out here all make sense to me. I think we want this to be fair and everyone to be involved and have a voice. Is this something where we would adopt them like through a motion, or is this more like a consensus type thing? I would think maybe that, but I just thought I'd ask the question.
Yeah, I think it's we could do it through a formal motion or just consensus, and it's always subject to change as well. As we go through and we find we need to add something, we certainly could do that as well.
Okay.
I had a question. I don't know whether we're to a point or this is coming up later. Lafayette General Plan Update 2040. You have different stakeholders. Is that an item on the agenda tonight, or?
It is, yes.
Okay, then I'll hold it. Okay.
Okay. Any other thoughts or adjustments to the agreements? If not, we'll go ahead and continue on, and we can always revisit it. Anybody can bring it up at a later time. Okay, great. So let's see here. Okay, share this one. Where'd it go? Okay. So just wanted to talk a little bit about public engagement and what that looks like within this committee and then outside of GPAC as well. So this meeting is sort of used for disseminating information and also synthesizing public comments into the actual document of the general plan. So and then on the opposite side of that, or on the opposite side of the same coin, is a public engagement, which is meant to understand the community values, and this committee would then be using that information in making their decisions. We foresee the general plan advisory committee meetings being run like traditional meetings, just as we are now. So staff presentation and questions, 3 minutes of public comment if there are any for each item, and then the GPAC discusses and then takes an action, hopefully moving things forward or directing staff how to adjust or amend the document. And then on the public engagement side, which is not within the meeting, because 3 minutes of public comment period is not a very engaging way to communicate with the public or understand their concerns, we would have a formal public engagement element, including charrettes and surveys. These are just some examples of things that we can do as part of the public engagement. Interviews and interactive mapping, serious games, things, a lot of these things will certainly have to be online as we're currently in our situation. But I just wanted to make a distinction between sort of these meetings and then the public engagement. And then that brings us to the stakeholder list. So this is what we use for sort of targeted outreach, making sure that we're getting all of the perspectives of the residents of Lafayette. And this is always sort of evolving. It has the word draft on it. It probably will continue to have the word draft on it. If you see anything that anyone that you need that is not on the list that you want added, we certainly can do that. And we'll find their contact information and make sure that they're aware of any of our public engagement opportunities.
May I add that, or do you want me to send an email for the names that you would like to be added?
Either way, I'll ask for suggestions at the end, and I can write them down.
Okay.
I wanted to provide our thoughts about how we might approach this with this group. So essentially each element having 3 meetings. One would be for information. So we would provide information and background on the specific topic. Then the second meeting would be the consult meeting, which would be bringing back any outcomes of public engagement, answering questions that you had from the previous meeting. And then this would be sort of the main discussion and deliberation of the general plan advisory committee, kind of directing staff on what, how to incorporate those things into the actual document. And then we would come back at a third meeting to sort of summarize and make sure that we did incorporate all the elements that you had asked us to. So that's sort of the plan for each element. So some of the elements are a little more complicated than others. And so they may require more than 3 meetings, but this would be the general staff recommendation for how to approach each of the items, each of the elements. And then in terms of order of review, housing element is placed first because of state mandates and timelines that are required. And then And then beyond that, it's sort of at our discretion how we'd like to go through it. Land use is pretty important and pretty relevant to a lot of other elements, including circulation and growth management. And then parks, trails, and recreation, conservation and open space, safety, noise, and then there's the optional elements that we'll introduce the idea of optional elements earlier on, but maybe placing those towards the end of the review. So that's something to consider. Is this the appropriate and right order of operations? And we can make adjustments as needed. So does the 3-meeting approach feel appropriate for the group? Any recommendations or alterations to that? Is there consensus about the order in which we would review the elements? And then are there any additions or amendments to the stakeholder list? So I'll go ahead and stop.
I do have some amendments to the stakeholder list.
Okay.
I would like under the let's see, the religious or the churches there, Lafayette Orinda Presbyterian Church is not shown. And the La Marinda Village is a charity within our community. Nonprofit, Lafayette based, their offices are here in Lafayette at LOPC.
Okay.
And then the cancer support community is not physically yet in town, but they certainly are working on becoming a presence. Okay.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else?
Sarah, this is Matt. One of the elements that I didn't see listed there, and it might be just a bridge too far, is the schools. It was interesting that they're not listed there as part of our general plan. Is there a reason for that?
That is a great question. I don't think it's its own element, but I think it's incorporated into the growth management or other elements. Yeah. Have you seen it as an element in other jurisdictions?
This is my first jurisdiction, so that's not a great question for me. It seems to be such a significant part of our community. I mean, many of us are here because of the schools for our kids, and they're a stakeholder, a huge stakeholder. I mean, that's the longest part of the list is the schools, but we don't discuss it as part of the plan. So it seems like there's a bit of a miss, from my perspective, a bit of a miss there. But maybe the schools are a completely separate entity and aren't part of the city. They've got their own school district. I don't know. I'm asking the question.
No, it's a great point. I do think it's incorporated throughout the plan. It's not its own separate element, but you are right too. It is a separate entity, and we don't have a lot of control over the land use of the school district land.
Okay, fair enough.
But it certainly will be part of our discussions. Martha?
Yeah, I had a question about what exactly of a typical optional elements included. Like, this is my first time ever seeing this. I don't think I was live for the previous one. So, what are typical optional elements?
Sure. So there are some such as environmental justice. I think there is, what is it? It's leaving my mind right now, but environmentalism, that kind of thing. So it's optional to put it sort of as a separate element, or we could incorporate it into each of the elements.
And as to kind of a follow-up to that, when are we exactly deciding what optional elements we're going to add? Is that a now discussion, or is that in 2 years?
No, it's a great question. So we should be talking about it sooner rather than later, because if we do want to incorporate it and sprinkle it within versus having a separate element, that would be a consideration. But also it may change the order of operations as well. So we will definitely bring that forward sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Jim?
Sarah, hi. You had laid out like 3 things to talk through. I think the first was this concept of like a 3-month cycle for each topic, which may be a worthy goal, if you will. I could see housing and land use taking more time than that.
Yes.
As a part, yeah. I mean, but as something, a North Star to steer to, we could do that, I suppose, and just see how it goes. The chair and staff would have a lot to say about that, I guess. So do you want to address these sequentially here so we can kind of just move through these issues?
Yeah, let's do that. So the 3-meeting approach is, like I mentioned, is sort of a guide. I 100% believe that, and I think I even put it in the original or the timeline, that the housing element would go beyond that. So not anticipating finishing that until the end of March, possibly longer. But it's just kind of the thought process of like information, discussion, and then kind of a feedback loop to make sure that we did incorporate what was requested.
Okay.
Sir, for the housing element discussion, will the staff be able to give us a briefing on the regional housing needs allocation issued by ABAG at some point?
Correct.
That's question 1. And then the second question is, will we be able to get a presentation from maybe the city attorney on the various basket of assembly bills and Senate bills that have worked through the system and how that may apply to us once the dust settles? So those 2 requests.
Yeah. So we do anticipate your first meeting in December, the December 15th meeting, to be an introductory meeting for the housing element. And that would have all kind of the background information and understanding about RENA and what that looks like. And then I certainly can check in about the assembly bill review. That might be something either the city attorney or our
lobbyists.
Yes, thank you.
Our legislative Townsend.
Legislative analysts.
Yeah, and we did have sorry to interrupt, we did have just a brief, not a brief, we had a legislative committee update last night. And with the legislature being sworn in on December 7th, they have until, they can start introducing bills, but they'll have until early January. I can't remember the exact deadline. So it would be appropriate, I think, to have Townsend come and talk to the group, but probably more in January, maybe even early February. But yeah, it will be a great thing because last night they didn't have specifics on bills. Senator Glazer's rep was there and just laid a broad outline, but they'll be forming those over the next couple of months.
Yeah.
Great.
A question. Sarah, I don't know if these timelines or the sequences, how set in concrete it is, but it seems like we're starting out with maybe the most difficult and potentially contentious issue here while we're still a brand new team finding our way.
Right.
Would it maybe make sense to start with something a little less challenging to get us going and get some traction?
We just really wanted to cement you as a team.
Well, kill us all.
So I don't disagree with you. However, there are some timelines that are associated with this particular element. And so that's why it was placed first. Not to torture you, just to make sure we're compliant with state law.
Well, and particularly what we will be doing is complying in 2021. But if we go till 2030 with this group, it's going to be an entirely different ballgame by the time we get to the end of the tunnel.
Oh, don't say that.
That's true. However, we're not going to take that long. And we actually have to have our housing element certified well before then. So 2023, I think, is when we need to have it certified. And so that's sort of set in stone and is for 8 years at least. And then we have to look at it again. Okay, so I'm not hearing any objections to sort of that inform, consult, revisit platform. Does anyone have any concerns with that approach?
I just have a couple of clarification questions again. Some of the terms you used for various types of public engagement, I was kind of unfamiliar with. Maybe we could like revisit that slide and then we could, is that something we're going to be covering like right now that I need to know to decide on that? Or is that something I can kind of figure out later?
So this is more about this group in particular. So it would be what staff is bringing forward at each meeting. So the initial discussion for each element would be just that background and information, and then the middle meetings, hopefully 1, 2, maybe several, would be the meat of it, the discussion, and then that last meeting would be a check-in. Did we get it all? But we'll bring back the other elements for the community engagement as a sort of a separate thing, if that's.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Sarah, this is Matt. Are we allowed to, if we had to extend the period for each element a little bit, because like the housing one to me is the obvious one. Do we have that flexibility for a little bit of an extension if we need it?
Based on the outline that I provided, 100%. We don't have flexibility based on the state guidelines, but we definitely have more. Yeah, it's not due till 2023, but there are other things that need to happen.
I understand, but okay, I got it. We're good.
Okay. And then just order of operations. I know we started to touch on that. There was sort of a reason and thought process behind it, but if anybody has any thoughts about if we should change it, and certainly we can bring this up again and discuss it later as we move through. We definitely need to do the housing element first, but after that we can do things in any order. And really, we just want to kind of get a consensus from the group, because we want to make sure that we have a path forward and that we're yeah, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Okay.
Can you just put it back up on the screen, please, Sarah?
Sure.
The path. And also, while you're pulling that up, I know someone asked about like are schools typically included. In some general plans, there's typically like a public services type element that oftentimes includes educational facilities, which I don't see on here, but usually that one also might include recreation or something. So maybe that is something that could be an optional.
Well,
we can tie it in.
I think it is in growth management currently, but I'll definitely make sure.
Currently? Okay, cool.
And sorry, growth management, we'll explain it each as we come, but growth management is kind of like, do we have the facilities in order to serve the public that is encompassing of the city? So, police response times and schools, things like that are included in growth management. Any strong opinions at this point? Just keeping an eye on the time.
Yeah.
Not hearing any.
So
Okay.
I like the order.
That's fine.
Great. Anybody have any?
Does it make sense to put land use together with housing? Because the predominant land use in the city is residential. We have some retail, but we don't have any like industrial I guess we have office too. Okay, so forget it. That's probably keep it separate.
I think, and that's not to say we can't, kind of maybe as we go through kind of show the interconnectedness of each of them, because land use definitely has things to do with circulation, right? Because you don't have the traffic without the use. So they are kind of interconnected, but
Yeah.
So we can make those connections clear when we bring forward each one.
Sarah, what, I don't know if we can define this with our three meetings. Where would all the things we're going to do with the public, for instance, the stakeholder interviews, we're going to do surveys.
Right.
What month would those come?
So just as an example, our initial thought process for the housing element would be that you're getting your first introductory meeting in December, which gives you the background and information. And then the entire month of January, we would be doing a sort of a giant public engagement push for that to kind of do all of those, make a lot of different options available for people to participate through different means. And then coalescing that information and giving it back to you in your February meeting.
Okay, so we would have that for the second meeting then.
You would have some of it for the second meeting and all of it for the third meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Any other sort of thoughts or ideas about the stakeholder list?
Sarah, this is maybe related to what's already there on the homeowner side, but we have various neighborhood groups in our community, and might make sense that to reach out to them or have them there just as a way to sort of like solicit viewpoints. I mean, there's a Spring Hill neighborhood group. I'm sure there's many all over the town. That would be worth maybe adding, maybe along with the Lafayette Homeowners Council.
Sure.
I don't know if we need to list every single one of them, but maybe just to be conscious that there are neighborhood associations in place.
So, yeah, certainly. So are they the formal HOAs that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, some are, I guess they may not be necessarily a formal HOA, but you've got groups of neighbors and you email listservs, and that's one way of people reach out to people, you know, in our neck of the woods, it's like once a year or something like that. So
yeah, so we only currently have contacts for the formal homeowners associations, but if you have others, please send them to us, and we have more of a fleshed out chart with actual contact information, so we can.
Got it. Okay, will do. Thank you.
Any other adjustments or amendments to the stakeholder list tonight? There's always room for for future. Not seeing any. I think it was mentioned inclusive Lafayette is not on there, so we will definitely add that also. Okay, great. So this, I think that covers everything that we wanted to cover this evening. And we will adjourn to our next meeting.
Oh, how about the roster?
Yes, let's talk about the roster. If everyone is comfortable with everyone else having your email address and address and phone number, I will create a roster and distribute it amongst yourselves, keeping in mind the Brown Act and what that looks like. Are there any objections to a roster?
No.
It won't be a
no objection. Yeah, no objection, but would it be possible to kind of just add a little brief, like you don't have to write bio sketches about us or anything, but just a little brief of where we're coming from, if we're the Burton Valley group or if we're the something.
Sure, yes.
What each of us represent, I think, would be very helpful.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very concise way of saying what I was trying to say. Perfect.
Good idea.
Okay.
And Sarah, just back to logistics. So in terms of the chair, vice chair, will we do that at our next meeting?
That is the intention, is to elect at the next meeting. I might be reaching out just kind of independently and asking if folks are comfortable serving in that role, or just because, so normally it would be like a nomination. One of you on the committee would nominate someone else, but you all don't really know each other, so that's a little more challenging. So we'll see what we can do in terms of soliciting a volunteer.
I thought you'd draw virtual straws and see who got the short one, in other words, right?
It's an honor. It's an honor.
Especially for the housing element.
Okay, so does anyone have any other thoughts or comments before we adjourn?
Good.
Oh, so you are going to make a roster then, Sarah?
I will make a roster.
Right. Okay, thank you, thank you.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next Tuesday on the 17th at 6 p.m.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.